I'm not one for believing in ghosts and all that stuff, but every now and then you come across a place that makes you think there might just be something in it. This is one of those places, and more about it later in the programme.
But first, if you live in London, there's one essential piece of kit you're bound to need sooner or later. But umbrellas can come in handy for more than keeping you dry.
It rained one night in London, and I never shall forget, for incidentally that's the night we met. And when it rains in London, you can bet it really rains, for all I know it may be raining yet. She was a shy little maid in distress, with not a cab or omnibus in view. So I played the part of a gentleman, I said, my umbrella's made for two.
Those two dashing crooners were singing the praises of the brolly about the same time that this place acquired its elegant shop front in the 1930s. But the shop itself has been here since Victorian times. This is Rory. Together with his two business partners, he's been keeping a weather eye on this city shop for the last 10 years. And he's become something of an expert on the man who started the business in the 1860s.
Thomas Fox came to London, found these premises, and basically set up T. Fox & Co. and very quickly established himself as one of the finest, if not the finest, umbrella maker, certainly in London, if not in England.
Back then, the umbrellas were all made on the premises, and this is the sort of high-class gear they specialised in.
And it's actually a gentleman's cane walking stick with a solid silver band and a solid brass ferrule. But, you know, the gentleman would have had this to strut around the streets of London with in the late 19th century, but with an added surprise in that inside this is a silk umbrella hidden away on inside.
By the 1930s, business was booming, so the owners decided to give their shop a facelift. They had grand designs. All they needed now was a grand designer.
Flush with success, the decision was taken to completely update the whole look of the place to make it relevant to the 30s. So they contracted probably the finest, the most innovative shop fitter of the day, Pollard, to come up with a scheme that would really capture the moment of this pacey modern world that they were now living in.
This is Pollard's original design for the shop front, but the final thing was even more spectacular.
The original scheme allows for chrome lettering, the FOX in chrome, that would probably be being backlit. And then at some point they decided that no, neon is the way to go. And they also, originally they were just going to have two foxes made standing proud of the sign. But around this time, a steam engine called the Silver Fox was being decommissioned. And somebody bought the decals off the steam engine, so the two foxes that stand either side of the red neon sign were actually on the side of the engine.
The most revolutionary part of the design was the window itself, built using non-reflective glass so customers could get a good look at the merchandise. Pollard also designed all the interior fixtures and fittings.
It was a complete fit-out front to back. Because at the time it probably had been unheard of for a small store like this to be treated to such an indulgent shop fit. We're actually extremely lucky because it's more or less completely intact.
With its gleaming new shop front and fittings, the business continued to thrive until the early 1990s. But by then the city was changing and independent shops like this one started to feel the pinch.
The beginning of the 90s saw off a lot of small independent businesses that were around in the city. I mean, the majority of the retail now is either food or phones. I mean, they dominate. Possibly within the square mile, we're one of maybe 2 or 3 true independents that still exist.
Rory has ambitious plans for Foxes. He's branched out from brollies, and today he sells a wider range of handmade English products. His aim is to build a larger empire based on the Foxes brand. Unlike many other independent shops, it looks as though this place still has a rosy future, rain or shine.
Do
you remember the days when football players drove Minis, not Mercedes? When you stood up to watch your team and only paid a couple of quid for the privilege? Do you remember the days when referees were always right? There was no such thing as a £1 million wage packet or a state-of-the-art football stadium? You don't? Well, maybe this will jog your memory.
Barrett is passing the ball to Oliver, who, by the aid at the forehead, is taking it under control. This time, I am going to demonstrate some further aspects of the game. Barrett and Oliver practicing backheeling the ball, which is a very good trick in football.
That charming bit of old footage was taken back in the 1920s, here at Craven Cottage, home of Fulham Football Club. And I bet if those chaps with the awfully long shorts were to come back today, they'd be very surprised to see how much of it has survived. When Fulham bought the land here in 1894, this stretch of the river was an overgrown wilderness. In fact, it had once been a park where Anne Boleyn came to hunt. As the club prospered, so the stadium took shape. This stand went up in 1905. Which makes it the oldest one in the capital, if not England. Like many of English football's great achievements, it's all due to a Scotsman. His name was Archibald Leach. So Simon, tell me a bit about Archibald Leach.
Well, Archie was a Glaswegian engineer. He was the son of a blacksmith, and he was clearly a very dedicated football fan. And at the turn of the century, he decided that in addition to his business, which is basically designing factories, that he would design football grounds. And he was commissioned by the director of Fulham at the time, who was a house builder called Henry Norris. And really what Henry Norris asked Leach to do was to create a facade here that would fit in with the general tone of the neighbourhood, which Norris himself had effectively built.
And here we are inside, a very different atmosphere from the outside, Simon.
It is, yes. I mean, here you've got really encapsulated the difference between the architecture on the street and the engineering inside the stand. Very utilitarian, very functional. Here we've got a perfect example of it. What we're looking at is really a big Meccano set. These pieces of pressed steel are shipped down from the Clyde Structural Iron Company on the River Clyde in Glasgow, and a team of Scottish engineers and builders come and put this up within the space of literally weeks. Knock up a grandstand in the close season, the summer. And of course that's exactly what football clubs wanted. Those days as now, they just want to save money and do it quickly and cheaply as possible.
London's high-tech new stadiums may be a bit more flash than the functional architecture on display at Craven Cottage, but what do you really need to watch a match? A roof to keep the rain off, and somewhere comfy to sit down. And these lovely old seats, which do look like they might be
well, these, I'm pretty sure, you know, I mean, I haven't done carbon dating on these, but we think that these are the original seats from 1905. The ironwork, the way they're shaped, very much conforms with a company called Bennett's of Glasgow that Leach worked with a great deal. And the fantastic things about these seats, looking at it with a modern eye, is that they're very environmentally friendly. Got iron frames, wooden tops, very simple, very comfortable, and actually in the winter they're quite warm on the iron. Indeed.
Tucked in a corner next door to the stand is another unique building. It looks like a cricket pavilion and serves a similar function. It's the place where the players get changed. There used to be similar buildings at other London grounds, but this is the only one left. Back in 1905, the pavilion and the stand were both built for a grand total of, wait for it, £15,000, which was a fair bit of money back then, but as nothing to current estimates for the new Wembley, which stand at 800 million. There's been more than one occasion recently when the future of this ground has hung in the balance. Lots of property developers would love to drive their bulldozers onto this bit of real estate, but the die-hard Fulham fans couldn't imagine watching their beloved team play anywhere but the Cottage. You've seen a few changes around here, but fortunately not too much to this particular stand.
This stand is wonderful, and it's still here, fortunately, and it's a wonderful, wonderful old stand.
Because you had a couple of occasions, at least, where you thought possibly it'd be your last game at the Cottage.
Certainly have. On one occasion, I think it was in the late 80s, the very last game, as was announced, was in fact my daughter's marriage and I had a great problem of being here for the last game or giving her away, and, which of course I did.
Good man. And so what would you feel like if ever, hopefully not, this was pulled down?
Well, the times it was going to go, Suggs, they were terrible days and you felt awful. I mean, we had a couple of years away from here while they redeveloped, and no, we had to get back here and be here. And I'm so pleased, and I'm just glad, and hopefully if it stays here for the next sort of 20, 30 years, it will see me out and I'll be happy. No, I don't want to ever move.
Now, even a malicious old Chelsea fan like me couldn't begrudge you this beautiful stand. Well, this old club has certainly had its ups and downs over the last 100 years. But now that this beautiful old stand has been listed and protected, unlike the fans at other London clubs, Fulham fans can still enjoy football the old-fashioned way. Wooden seats and all. My granny could have scored that. Coming up next, I'll be treading the boards with entertainment legend Roy Hudd. In Victorian times, if you fancied a good night out and had a liking for a tipple and a bit of a sing-song, the chances are you would have made your way to a music hall. And in 1875, there were over 300 venues to choose from, so you didn't have to travel far for an ease up. But of course, unfortunately, with the advent of cinema and television, most of them died off, and there are only a handful of buildings left. This place in North London first opened its doors in 1863. It was home to McDonald's Music Hall, and the burghers of Shoreditch took to it with relish. But you have to go east to find the most venerable survivor of all. This is Wilton's Grand Music Hall. Tucked away down a side street near the docks, this East End Palace of Entertainment was one of the top venues in London. For 25 years, it was a launch pad for some of Victorian theatre's biggest stars. The music hall closed in the 1880s, since when the building's been used as everything from a Methodist mission to a warehouse. As it passed from one owner to the next, its condition steadily deteriorated. And it's only thanks to some high-profile campaigners that it's escaped demolition. It survived the Wrecking Ball in 1964 due to a campaign led by Sir John Betjeman. And Wilton's Music Hall still requires an enormous amount of money and a lot of care and attention to stop it disappearing 40 years later. Today, the music hall is run by a trust, which plans to restore the building to its original Victorian splendour. It's not just the facade that needs work, the whole building is crying out for some serious attention, not least the Grand Auditorium itself. I'll be taking a closer look at this later. But the Wilton story, like many of the best showbiz tales, starts in the public bar.
Dilapidated. This is sort of where Wilton's Music Hall began. John Wilton was running a pub here very successfully called the Old Mahogany Bar. It was quite cool and swanky compared to all the other bars around here. You can see there's just some tiny bits of original plaster left behind. Above the saloon doors here is Neptune, although we at Wilton's like to think it's really John Wilton watching over his bar, still making sure that we're behaving properly.
So basically the music hall at this point was just a small room with a piano out the back there.
Absolutely. You know, the real beginnings of early music halls, so he had his little back room, people were coming along, having a sing-along, but they were coming here a lot, and his room was a bit too small, so he extended it a bit more, and a bit more, and a bit more, and eventually hit Cable Street, 'cause it's running just behind us here, and couldn't go any further. So he basically did a kind of deal with all the residents and all the shopkeepers of this row of houses. There are 5. This number's 1 to 5 Grace's Alley, and he kind of knocked them together and built the Grand Music Hall over their backyards. But he did it in 4 months in a pretty ad hoc, haphazard, very quick way. And I'd love to just show you some of it because it's hilarious and rather wonderful the way it's all kind of jammed together.
So what's out here?
So obviously once John Wilton had built his Grand Music Hall, he needed a grand entrance. He couldn't have them coming through his little pub door anymore. So he built this one. He knocked through this shop here, built these beautiful doorways, but he did it in 4 months. He was in quite a hurry not to lose his audience. So he literally got together what he could. This beautiful York stone floor is absolutely all nicked overnight from the rather nice, well-closed square next door. Everything's held up by railway lines. I mean, it was a real kind of mishmash of help and dockers and things that were lying around, clearly, to just whap it together. And they didn't even care about the people living here so much. You've got windows, you've got people's back doors still left behind. And here's a fireplace right in front of us. This was clearly somebody's front parlour room. And so was this room here, but not anymore. And as you see, when we go through here, it gets more and more crazy.
It really is a warrant. So what would life have been like for the people who were living here while his plans are underway?
Well, completely crazy. And I mean, even if they had been paid an awful lot of money, you know, you can't see out of your back window anymore. And because all the back entrances to the houses have been blocked up by the music hall, they could only come in through the front entrance. So you've got this crazy sort of complex of people who live here are coming through the front door, people who are going to the music hall coming through the front door, people who are going to the pub coming through the front door. And they're all living, and the shopkeepers as well, living and working in this really very dangerous space. It's basically got one entrance and one exit, but actually a lot of people would have lived and worked here. So it would have been quite mad, but rather wonderful, I think. And, you know, it'd be really lovely to run something not entirely dissimilar now.
It's an obvious question, but what does this place mean to you?
It means a lot to me. It means more to me to raise the £3.5 million that it's going to cost to re-roof it, stabilise the walls, replace the floors by 2009, which will be our 150th anniversary of the opening of Wilton's Music Hall. So it's a good target to have.
Well, I shall look forward to coming to that 150th anniversary.
Absolutely, parties everywhere.
In fact, I'm going to be wearing a silk top hat and tails. I think I shall arrive on a piebald pony. I'm going to work on a little act. I think I'll do an act that night.
Oh, you'll be more than welcome. Make it look nice.
Of course, the backstage stuff is all very interesting, but this is what makes the place unique. The Grand Auditorium. Top of the bill today is a man who's president of the Music Hall Society and a great champion of Wilton's. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the iridescently irrepressible, indisputably irreplaceable, irrefutable king of comedy. Is that enough, Mr. Roy Hudd?
Well, what a nice little place you have here. Is it to rent?
What an atmosphere.
Oh, it just hits you, doesn't it? You walk in, it's just marvellous, and it almost comes to life.
Well, you're very well known, Roy, as an aficionado and a great enthusiast for the music hall days. What is it about those times that does it for you?
Well, I mean, I think point one, I do love London very much indeed, and it seemed to be most music hall was London based, and London was the big sort of breeding ground of performers. Really it was. Even if they came from up north, this is where they made their name. But I love the songs best, you see. I mean, the guys who wrote those songs didn't half know what they were doing, didn't they? And didn't they know how to write a chorus that if you'd heard it once, you knew it the second time round?
You know, and because we're talking obviously about the time before records, the time before television, radio, any of that, so you could have your one good song, and if you had the right one, you could tour that relentlessly, and if it worked, it worked. And that was it. And it had to work, because it was all you had, your one big song.
And it had to be something that they could pick up an audience very quickly, you know. When you think of songs like Two Lovely Black Eyes,
exactly.
Only got to hear them once, haven't you? And you know it the next time it comes to the chorus.
Two lovely black eyes.
Oh, what a surprise! But I love the line, only for telling a man he was wrong. Two lovely black eyes.
Like the rest of the building, the auditorium is in urgent need of some TLC. But in its day, this was the ritziest establishment in the neighbourhood. And what a neighbourhood! With the docks just down the road, this part of town was regarded as, shall we say, one of London's more colourful areas.
You know what I mean? Of course, this was a tough old hall, I tell you. It was like the working men's clubs a few years ago. Worse, I should think, probably, you know. But don't forget, the majority of the customers here were sailors, people connected with the sea because of the docks, you know. And I mean, those days they used to go and they'd be at sea for about 6 months. And they'd finish the tour, pockets full of money, get off the boat, straight in here. Well, all their money would be copped off them, you know. All the birds would be after them, spend all their money, and they tell me, this is only a rumour, of course, but at the back there's a flap door, you know, and the sailors would sit in here, they'd spent all their money, they'd pulled the crumpet and all this stuff, and suddenly the flap would open and someone would come out, hit them on the head, and they'd be back on a boat, and they'd only be on shore for about 2 days.
Those who managed to avoid a coshing had a chance to see stars of a different sort.
the very early music hall stars would have been here. People like Sam Cowell, the Ratcatcher's daughter. People like Harry Clifton, you know, who sang motto songs. Work Boys Work was one of his charming little ditties. And it was rumoured that he was paid by the bosses to go into the music halls and brainwash the working classes into working harder. And he had sang songs like that. Work, boys, work and be contented as long as you've enough to buy a meal. Here's a fact you can't deny, you'll be wealthy by and by if you'll only put your shoulder to the wheel.
That's when I would have been at the bar.
And apparently that was it. He got dropsy from all the bosses, you know, said, yeah, go and make them have it, you know. And the same, of course, the great man of all, the early great music hall style, and one name that people do remember was George Laybourne, Champagne Charlie. Now it was that again, they said he was paid by Moe and Chandon to go into the pubs and sing that song so that more people would buy champagne. But it's a cracking song, isn't it?
It's a terrific song.
Yeah.
Timeless, isn't it, eh?
Not much.
If that ain't an intro to singing Champagne Charlie,
Slightly subtly pushed in there, I think.
Plenty of famous double acts have graced the stage here at Wilton's over the years, and now it's time to introduce a new pairing, Hud and Suggs. Or should that be Suggs and Hud? I think I better have a word with my agent.
Good, isn't it?
To look out there, isn't that something? Imagine 2,000 people in it, eh? Not bad.
As long as the cabbages and rotten tomatoes didn't fly.
You ready for this?
Come on then.
Champagne Charlie is my name.
Champagne Charlie is my name.
And there's no drink as good as fizz, fizz, fizz.
I'll drink every drop there is.
All around the town it is the same. By pop, 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 I rose to fame.
I'm the idol of the bar.
Flash, and Champagne Charlie is my name. You got the job, sir?
Thank you very much.
If you come to the office, we'll sign the contract.
There's not a lot of money, but think of the profile.
Yes,
That's the I love that one. Great, that one.